Millionaire freezes when he sees his black ex-wife at airport with twins who look just like him. Hey, everyone, welcome back. I am so glad you've chosen to spend a little bit of your day here with me. Your comments, your support, it truly means the world, and it's why I get to share stories like the one we have today. And this one is about one of those moments. A moment so powerful, so completely unexpected, it can shatter a life in the time it takes for a heart to beat. It asks a question we've all thought about. What happens when the life you so carefully, so meticulously built comes face to face with the one you so heartlessly destroyed? Well, let's find out. To understand Julian Hayes, you have to understand the world he built around himself. It wasn't just a world of wealth, it was a fortress of quiet. He was here, in the Centurion first-class lounge at JFK, and the silence was his oldest, most expensive friend. It was a thick, pristine silence, the kind you can only buy. The kind that drowns out the noise of the world, and more importantly, the noise inside your own head. At 35, Julian was the king of his own sterile kingdom. On the tablet, beside his glass of whiskey, neat, no ice, always a confirmation glowed in crisp digital green. $97 million. Just like that, another company was his. He didn't just acquire it, he consumed it. The thrill of the win, that fire that used to roar inside him, was now just a pilot light. It was enough to keep him warm, but it no longer felt like a bonfire. A flight attendant, Anya, moved with a practiced, ghost-like grace. Another, Mr. Hayes. He didn't even look up. It was a power move, a small daily confirmation of his status. Just water, no ice. Of course, sir. He knew her name because information was ammunition. He heard the gentle clink of the pitcher against glass. Outside the massive window, a storm was brewing. Not just a storm, but a blizzard, throwing a thick, gray blanket over the tarmac. His flight to Tokyo, another deal, another conquest, was delayed. An electronic chime, the only sound that dared to be sharp in this lounge, announced a new departure time. 3 more hours. 3 hours stuck in this beautifully designed cage. Julian's fingers tapped an impatient rhythm on the arm of his chair. Delays were unacceptable. They were glitches in his perfectly coded life. His phone buzzed, flashing the name A on the screen. His father. Julian silenced it. He'd call him back from the air, from a position of strength. Calling his father while grounded felt like kneeling. He was a man of the sky, of penthouses and boardrooms that looked down on the world. The ground, he'd long decided, was for other people. The ground was messy. The ground had memories. Now, picture this. 2 floors directly below him, in the roaring, chaotic, beautifully human mess of Terminal C. There's another world entirely. And in this world, Imani Carter is the queen of a very different kind of kingdom. It's not a silent kingdom, it's a symphony of life. It's the squeak of a little boy's sneakers, the rumble of 1,000 suitcases, the constant overlapping lullaby of final boarding calls. And at the heart of it all are her twins, Leo and Luna. "Leo, honey, please don't lick the railing," she said, her voice a perfect blend of warmth and loving authority. That railing is a world traveler. Her son, all of 6 years old, with a thundercloud of dark curls and a serious frown that could stop traffic, pulled back. "But I wanted to know if it tasted like the city," he reasoned. with the flawless logic only a child can possess. It tastes like rust and regret, baby. Trust me on this one. His twin sister, Luna, was pointing up. Mama, look. The little man on the sign is running. Is he gonna miss his plane? Luna was the poetry to Leo's prose. Where he saw facts to be tested, she saw stories to be told. She had wide, curious eyes. Eyes the color of moss after a rainstorm. Imani's heart gave that old, familiar squeeze. A dull ache, like a bone that was badly set. Because those eyes, that impossible shade of hazel green, they didn't come from her side of the family. They came from him, from Julian, a ghost she had spent 10 years trying to exorcise. He is sweetie, she said, her voice steady. And that's exactly why we're staying right here. They were on their way to Chicago to see her sister. It was the twins' first flight, a trip funded by a massive freelance design project that had stolen Amy's sleep for a month straight. But the exhaustion vanished every time she saw the wonder on their faces. This was her life's work. Not the design, but this. Them. She had built this life from the ashes of another one, and she had built it with her own 2 hands. It was a good life. A real life. She settled the kids at a small table in the food court, a promise of French fries working as a temporary anchor for their boundless energy. As she stood in line, a collective groan echoed through the terminal. A wave of sound. She looked up at the giant departure board and watched as a cascade of angry, red letters began to replace the hopeful green ones. C-A-N-C-E-L-L-A-D. 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 There it was. Her flight. A voice, drained of all emotion, crackled over the P system, announcing a severe, grounding snowstorm. All flights, all hope of leaving tonight, were gone. Imani felt her shoulders slump. The air, already thick with anxiety, grew heavy with despair. She took a deep, steadying breath. For her children, she was the lighthouse. She had to be the calm. Okay, guys, she said, returning to the table with a brave smile and a carton of fries. Looks like our adventure is getting an upgrade. Leo's face crumpled. We're not flying? Not tonight, my little scientist. The snow has booked the entire sky for a private party. Can we make a snow angel? Luna asked, already moving on to the next possibility. Imani's heart swelled. I don't think security would like that very much, my love. She looked around at the chaos, the long lines already snaking from the service desks, the growing sea of stranded souls. This was going to be a long night. And her budget, the one she guarded so carefully, was not built for a long night like this. Up in his silent heaven, the announcement was met with little more than discreet, frustrated sighs. Julian stared at the swirling vortex of white outside the window with a cold, contained fury. His schedule wasn't just bent, it was broken. Mr. Hayes, Anya murmured, her voice a soft hum of professional regret. The airport is effectively on lockdown. We can try to arrange a car, but the roads are closing fast. Don't bother, Julian snapped, rising to his feet. The silence was no longer a comfort, it was a cage. He had to move, to do something, anything. To be powerless was a feeling he refused to entertain. I'm going downstairs. Anya's perfectly composed face registered a flicker of shock. Downstairs, sir? With the general public? Yes, Anya, he said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. With them. He left his briefcase, his armor, behind. He took the escalator down, and it felt like a descent into another world. The noise hit him like a physical blow, crying, shouting, a dozen languages, all speaking the language of frustration. The air was thick with the smells of humanity, sweat, cheap coffee, damp clothes. It was the smell of the world he'd paid a fortune to forget. He moved through the throng, his jaw clenched. People were camped out on the floor, their faces illuminated by the blue light of their phones. He felt a wave of something dark and familiar, contempt. This is what happened when you had no plan, when you let the world happen to you. He was heading for the food court, the brightest point in the terminal, looking for a place to think, to regain control. He found a spot near a pillar, a small island in the river of people. He was scanning the chaos, his mind already formulating strategies, when his eyes snagged on a figure. A woman, her back to him, managing 2 small children. There was something in her posture, a quiet grace in the way she moved, that struck a chord in a part of his memory he had bricked over years ago. The dark, beautiful curls of her hair, the elegant slope of her shoulders. No, his mind whispered. It's not possible. A ghost in a city of millions. And then she turned. Just a little, just enough for him to see her profile. And all the air in Julian Hayes's body, all the air in the entire cavernous terminal, seemed to vanish. Imani. His mind went white. A catastrophic system failure. The noise of the airport dissolved into a low, distant hum. 10 years. 10 years since the letter. 10 years since the check. 10 years since he'd made the choice to trade his heart for an empire. He had buried her under every deal, every skyscraper, every brutal, successful day of his life. But there she was. And then his gaze, as if pulled by an unseen force, drifted down. The little girl beside her looked up, her head tilted with curiosity, and she looked right at him. And Julian's world, the one of stocks and steel, and forgetting it, didn't just crack. It atomized, because he was looking into a reflection. He was looking into his own eyes. The same startling hazel green he saw in the mirror every single morning. His head snapped to the boy. The boy was frowning at a limp French fry with an intensity that was so profoundly, so achingly familiar. It was his frown, the scowl his father had always criticized. The one that was on his own face right now. Twins. Her children. His children. The realization wasn't a thought. It was a physical event. A shockwave that traveled from his eyes to his soul, buckling something deep inside him. His phone, which he'd been gripping like an anchor, slipped from his suddenly numb fingers. Clattered to the tiled floor, the sound sharp and obscene in the sudden silence of his mind. Across the food court, I heard it. A mother's instinct, always tuned to the frequency of disruption. Her eyes scanned the crowd, and then they stopped. They found him. A tall man in a dark, tailored coat, standing completely still, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. A face she knew better than her own. A face she saw in the 2 precious lives beside her every single day. Julian. Their eyes locked across the chaos. And in that single, shattering moment, 10 years of unspoken words, of anger, of heartbreak, of buried, stubborn love, detonated between them. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Have you ever had a moment where your past just walked right up and looked you in the face? What do you think is going through Imani's mind right now? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever felt time stretch? That moment, right after a car crash, or right before you get terrible news, where a single second seems to last a lifetime? That's where they were now. Julian and Imani, stranded in an airport, and stranded in a single, impossible moment that was 10 years in the making. For Julian, it was like the entire, carefully constructed building of his life had just been leveled by a wrecking ball. And for Imani, it was like a ghost she had long since buried had just walked right out of its grave and into the middle of her life. What happens next? What do you do when the unspeakable thing happens? Do you run? Do you scream? Or do you just freeze? For a long moment, nobody moved. The chaotic symphony of the airport, the announcements, the crying children, the rolling suitcases, it all faded into a dull, distant roar for both of them. There was only the space between them, 100 feet of tiled floor that felt both like an impassable chasm and no distance at all. Julian's mind was a maelstrom of denial and terrifying certainty. Those eyes, that frown. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs, a wild animal trapped in the cage of his tailored suit. Every instinct he had honed over a decade of ruthless corporate warfare screamed at him. Asset protection. Damage control. Retreat. His world was built on managing variables, and he was now facing a variable so profound, so earth-shattering, that his entire operating system had crashed. He saw the way Imani's hand, almost unconsciously, went to the back of Luna's head, another to Leo's shoulder, pulling them a fraction of an inch closer to her body. It was a primal, protective gesture. She was shielding them from him. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. Across the food court, Imani's blood had turned to slush in her veins. Seeing Julian was like being struck by lightning. It was a violent, elemental shock that left her breathless. She had played this scene in her mind 1,000 times over the years, usually in the dead of night when sleep wouldn't come. In some versions, she was furious, screaming all the words she'd swallowed for a decade. In others, she was cool, indifferent, walking past him as if he were a stranger. She had never, not once, imagined a version where she would be rooted to the spot, her body trembling, with his children, their children standing beside her. It was Luna who broke the spell. "Mama," she whispered, her little voice cutting through the silent tension. That man dropped his phone. Luna's words were a pinprick to the balloon of shock that had enveloped Imani. Reality came rushing back in, sharp and painful. The noise of the terminal, the sticky floor, the smell of cold fries, and the man, the ghost, staring at them, at her children, with an expression of such raw, unmasked shock that it terrified her. She saw the flicker in his eyes, a dawning calculation. He was seeing it. He was seeing himself in them. Imani's fear instantly hardened into something else, a cold, protective fury. This was her world, her peace, her children. He had no right. He had surrendered his right to be here, to look at them, to even know they existed, 10 years ago with a check and a goodbye scribbled on hotel stationery. She bent down, her movements swift and sure, her voice a low, urgent murmur that was only for her children. "Okay, my loves. Change of plans. We're going to find a quieter spot." "But my fries," Leo protested, his world still blessedly simple, revolving around salt and potatoes. "I'll get you more fries," she promised, her eyes never leaving Julian's frozen form. "I'll buy you a whole potato farm. Right now, we move." Her voice was calm, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She was a lioness, and the hunter had just stumbled into her territory. She took their hands, her grip firm, and turned them away from the food court, away from him. It was a deliberate, final gesture. A closing of a door he had just kicked open. That movement, her turning away, finally jolted Julian back into his own body. It was like a system reboot. No, the word screamed through his mind. No, you don't get to just walk away. Not again. I don't get to let you walk away again. He took a step forward, then another. He was clumsy, his long legs feeling disconnected from his brain. He was moving through the crowd, a man who was used to people parting for him, but now he was just another body in the throng, clumsy and desperate. I'm Mani, he called out. His voice was raw, rusty from a decade of disuse in this context. It wasn't the voice of a CEO. It was the voice of a man drowning. Imani heard him. Of course, she heard him. Every cell in her body went rigid. She didn't stop. She didn't turn around. She held her children's hands tighter and walked faster, her destination anywhere but there. To turn around would be to acknowledge him. To acknowledge the chaos he threatened to unleash on the careful, peaceful world she had built. Mama, you're walking too fast, Leo complained, his little legs struggling to keep up. I know, baby. I'm sorry, she whispered, forcing herself to slow down, but every instinct was screaming, run. Julian saw her quicken her pace. The sight of her back, retreating from him, was a scene straight from his deepest, most persistent nightmare. It was the last time he'd seen her, walking away from him on campus, him too proud and too scared to call her back. History was repeating itself, and he was still the coward. No, not this time. He pushed forward, a frantic excuse me, sorry mumbled to the people he bumped past. He was closing the distance. He was 10 feet away. 5. He could smell the faint, familiar scent of the coconut shea butter she used to use in her hair. The scent memory was so powerful, it almost brought him to his knees. Imani, please. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air, not daring to touch her. Please, just wait. She stopped. She didn't turn, but her shoulders were ramrod straight, a wall of defiance. She stood there for a second, the whole noisy world seeming to hold its breath with them. Leo and Luna looked up at their mother, then back at the tall man who had followed them, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Slowly, deliberately, Imani turned around, and the look on her face was not the one he remembered. The soft, loving adoration of the girl he'd left behind was gone. In its place was a woman he didn't know. A woman with eyes that held a decade of pain, a decade of strength, a decade of raising 2 children by herself. Her face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. What do you want, Julian? She asked, and her voice was ice. No warmth, no recognition of their shared past. Just the flat, dead tone one uses for a stranger. A dangerous stranger. His carefully prepared corporate scripts, his ability to command a room, it all deserted him. He was standing in front of the one person his power couldn't touch. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. What could he possibly say? I'm sorry, I destroyed your life, and then vanished. By the way, are those my children? His eyes, against his will, flickered down to the twins. Leo was staring at him with that unnervingly familiar frown. He had a smudge of ketchup on his cheek. Luna was half hidden behind Imani's leg, her big hazel-green eyes, his eyes peering out at him with a child's unfiltered curiosity. Imani saw where he was looking. She shifted her body subtly, blocking his view of them. It was a small movement, but it was as clear as a slap in the face. They are not for you. They, Julian started, his voice a choked whisper. They look nothing like you. Imani cut him off, her voice sharp as glass. It was a lie. A desperate, reflexive lie to protect them. To protect herself. They are my children. Mine. You have no business here. No business with us. Whatever you think you see, you're wrong. The force of her denial was staggering. He felt the world tilt on its axis. Was he crazy? Was he so haunted by his own past that he was projecting his own face onto strangers? But he knew he wasn't. He knew it with a certainty that was terrifying. He was looking at his own blood. Imani, their eyes he managed, pointing a trembling finger toward Luna. Go back to your life, Julian, she said, her voice low and venomous now, each word a carefully aimed dart. Go back to your private jets and your boardrooms, and a world where people like us don't exist. You made your choice a long time ago. Now you have to live with it. And we have to live without you. We've been doing just fine. She turned to leave again, a final, brutal dismissal. But this time, Julian found his voice. Not the voice of a CEO, but something older, something raw. Their names, he blurted out, the words desperate. Please, just tell me their names. Imani froze again, her back to him. The question hung in the air, a plea so simple, so fundamental, it seemed to disarm all of her defenses. To name them was to make them real to him. To give him a piece of them. It was the one thing she couldn't bear to do. But before she could say no, before she could pull them away forever, a small, clear voice piped up. I'm Leo, her son said, stepping out from behind her leg, his frown replaced by a look of bold curiosity. And this is Luna. She's shy. And just like that, the bomb had detonated. The secret she had guarded for 6 years, the truth she had carried alone, was out, offered up by the innocent, unknowing voice of her son. His son. Julian stared at the boy, Leo, and then at his sister, Luna. He mouthed their names, silent, sacred things. Leo, Luna. The sound of them, even in his mind, was the most beautiful and most devastating thing he had ever heard. Mani closed her eyes, a single, silent tear of fury and despair tracing a path down her cheek. It was over. The bubble had burst. The ghost was no longer a ghost. He was here, and he knew. There are moments that change everything. We just saw one of them. A name. A simple introduction from a little boy who has no idea he just rewrote the future. For Julian, hearing those names, Leo and Luna, was like finding a key to a door he never knew existed. But for Imani, it was the sound of a fortress she had spent years building just crumbling to the ground. The secret was out. The ghost was real. And now he had their names. What do you do when you can't run? When the person you need to escape is standing right in front of you, and the whole world seems to be conspiring to keep you there. This is where the real storm begins. Not just outside in the sky, but right there in the heart of a crowded airport terminal. The names Leo and Luna hung in the air between them. They were no longer just a hypothetical boy and girl. They were real people, and Julian now had a claim to them, however tenuous, however undeserved. Imani's eyes snapped open, the single tear a declaration of war. She wiped it away with a fierce, angry motion. Her first instinct, her only instinct, was to shield, to deny, to protect. Doesn't matter, she said, her voice dangerously low. She grabbed Leo's hand, pulling him back behind her. Their names don't matter to you. They are not part of your world. She looked at Julian, her gaze sweeping over his expensive coat, his polished shoes, the whole aura of untouchable wealth that clung to him like a shroud. You are a stranger. Do you understand me? A stranger. She turned, her movements sharp and decisive now. There was no hesitation. She was a mother on a mission, and that mission was to put as much distance as possible between her children and the man who was their father. Julian watched her walk away, and a cold, primal panic seized him. This was it. This was the moment of choice. He could let her go. He could retreat to his first-class lounge, board his private jet tomorrow, and fly back to his silent, orderly life. He could process this information, have his lawyers handle it, and reduce this cataclysmic event to a manageable financial problem. It was the Julian Hayes way. It was the smart move, the safe move. But as he watched the two small figures, the boy with his own determined gait, the girl with her hand clutched in her mother's, a part of him that he thought had died long ago roared to life. It was a raw, possessive, paternal instinct. It screamed a single, undeniable truth: mine. He moved without thinking, his body overriding a decade of programming. Amani, wait. He caught up to them in 3 long strides, not touching her, but planting himself in her path. He was a wall she couldn't get around. You can't just walk away. Watch me, she shot back, her eyes blazing. People were starting to stare now, their attention drawn to the low, intense drama unfolding in their midst. You taught me how, remember? It's easy. You just turn your back and you don't look back. You were an excellent teacher. The words were a physical blow. He actually flinched. He deserved it. He deserved every bit of her venom and more. But the children, they didn't deserve this. People are watching, he said, his voice dropping to a low, urgent murmur. The kids, don't you dare, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Don't you dare use them as a shield. You don't get to say their names. You don't get to care about what they see. She tried to maneuver around him, but he mirrored her movement, blocking her again. I'm not using them, he pleaded, and he was horrified to hear the desperation in his own voice. He was a man who never pleaded. Just 10 minutes. Mani, please. That's all I'm asking. 10 minutes to understand. Understand what? She demanded, her voice rising. That you can't just abandon people and not expect consequences. That the world doesn't just erase the people you decide to forget. It took you 10 years to understand. I don't have 10 minutes for you, Julian. I have a lifetime that you are not a part of. Just then, as the tension between them reached a fever pitch, a powerful gust of wind rattled the massive plate glass windows of the terminal. The lights flickered, casting the scene in a strange, strobe-like effect. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Over the intercom, a new announcement began, this one more grave than the last. Attention all passengers. Due to the worsening blizzard conditions and a loss of power on several runways, all airport operations are now suspended. I repeat, all operations are suspended. No flights will be departing until further notice. We are advising all passengers to find a safe place away from the main concourse windows. The airport wasn't just closed for the night. It was a fortress under siege from the storm. They were trapped, not for a few hours, but for the foreseeable future. Trapped together. The announcement was like a death knell to Imani's hope of escape. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. She looked around at the sea of stranded, anxious faces, and then back at Julian, the architect of her original heartbreak, now a physical prisoner in the same space. It was a cosmic joke of the cruelest kind. Julian saw the shift in her. The fire in her eyes banked, leaving behind a smoldering exhaustion. This was his chance. Not to win, but to de-escalate. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, you're right. Now is not the time or the place." He took a deliberate step back, giving her space, trying to show her he wasn't a threat, even though his very presence was the biggest threat of all. "But we're stuck here. All of us. And those kids." He looked at Leo and Luna, who were watching the exchange with wide, confused eyes. They shouldn't be camped out on the floor of a terminal. It's not safe. He was right, and she hated him for it. The terminal was already descending into a more organized form of chaos. People were claiming territory, setting up makeshift beds with their coats, the air thick with stress and recycled oxygen. It was no place for 2 6-year-olds. "We'll be fine," she said, the words lacking conviction. "No," Julian said, and for the first time, a sliver of his old, decisive self returned. But this time it was in service of them, not himself. "No, I still have a few privileges in a place like this. Let me at least do this. Not for me. Not even for you. For them. Let me find us a place to go. Our room. Something quiet. Something safe." Imani stared at him, torn. Every instinct told her to refuse, to reject any help from him, to maintain her independence, the very independence she had forged in the fire of his abandonment. Accepting his help felt like a concession, like a betrayal of the woman she had become. But then she looked down at Leo, who was yawning, and at Luna, who was starting to shiver slightly. Her pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Her children's well-being was the only currency that mattered. The battle on her face was epic. He could see her warring with herself. Pride versus practicality, anger versus maternal love. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire last decade, she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was the smallest of victories, but to Julian, it felt monumental. He pulled out his phone, the one he had picked up off the floor, its screen miraculously intact. He made a call, not to his father, not to his pilot, but to the Black Card Concierge Service he paid a small fortune for every year and rarely used. His voice was low, firm, and commanding. He wasn't asking, he was directing. He explained the situation's stranded, blizzard, need for a secure private space within the airport itself. He mentioned a woman and 2 small children. He used words like non-negotiable and immediate. While he was on the call, Imani knelt down to her kids. "Okay, little birds," she said softly, her voice a comforting balm in the stressful air. "We're going to play a new game. It's called Airport Campout. But we've got a super secret VIP tent." "Like a real tent?" Leo asked, his eyes lighting up. "Even better," she promised, though she had no idea what Julian was arranging. All she knew was that for a few minutes she had surrendered a sliver of control, and it felt both terrifying and strangely relieving. Julian ended the call. "Okay," he said, his eyes finding hers. "There's a private suite. The airline reserves it for diplomats and dignitaries. It's not being used. They're opening it for us." He paused, his expression unreadable. "It's in the quiet part of the international terminal. We can wait out the storm there." The offer hung in the air. A private suite, A quiet room. Safety. Warmth. Everything she wanted for her children. And it was all being provided by the one man she wanted nothing from. "Who are you?" Luna asked, her voice small, her shyness momentarily overcome by curiosity. She was looking right at Julian. Question, so innocent, struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. Who was he? He was their father. He was a stranger. He was a ghost. He was the man who had missed every first step, every first word, every single moment of their lives. Imani answered for him, her voice flat and neutral, a carefully erected wall. He's a man who is going to help us find a warm place to rest, sweetie. That's all. She looked at Julian, her eyes conveying a clear, unspoken message. That is all you will ever be. Without another word, she took her children's hands. Julian led the way, and she followed a careful 10 feet behind, a silent, unwilling participant in this bizarre, temporary truce. They walked through the crowded terminal, a strange little procession, the millionaire in his tailored coat, the resilient mother with her head held high, and the 2 children who were the living, breathing, unknowing bridge between their 2 fractured worlds. They were moving toward a shared space, a forced proximity that promised to be more volatile than the blizzard raging outside. They're trapped together. She had to accept his help for the sake of the kids, but you can feel the tension. Have you ever had to rely on someone you didn't trust? What do you think is the first thing they'll say to each other when they're finally alone in that room? Share your predictions in the comments. Let's talk about it. A closed room. After all the noise and chaos of the terminal, you'd think it would be a relief. But sometimes, silence isn't peaceful. Sometimes, silence is just a space for all the things you haven't said to get louder. Julian had found them a sanctuary from the storm outside, but he had inadvertently created the perfect stage for the storm between them. This is where the walls come down, where the past isn't just a memory, but a living, breathing in the room. And we're about to find out that sometimes the most fragile moment of connection can happen right before everything shatters all over again. The suite was an island of sterile calm in the ocean of airport chaos. It was all muted grays and polished chrome, with a large sofa, a few comfortable armchairs, and a kitchenette stocked with overpriced water and gourmet snacks. A large window looked out onto the tarmac, where the snow was now a blinding horizontal blizzard. The world outside had disappeared. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, the silence was deafening. It was a vacuum, pulling at the decade of unspoken history between them. Leo and Luna, however, were oblivious to the tension. For them, it was an adventure. "Oh, look at that TV," Leo exclaimed, running toward a massive screen on the wall. Luna, meanwhile, discovered that the plush carpet was perfect for somersaults. For a few precious moments, their childish joy was a buffer, a neutral territory in the Cold War between their parents. Imani watched them, her posture still rigid, a sentinel guarding the perimeter of her family. She put her bag down, but didn't take off her coat, a clear signal that this was a temporary stop, not a surrender. Julian stood awkwardly by the door, feeling like an intruder in a scene he had arranged. He had power in boardrooms. He could command the attention of billionaires and heads of state. But in this room, with this woman and these children, he was utterly powerless. He was a ghost, and he had no idea how to become a man. "They should probably eat something real," he said, his voice quiet, testing the air. "I can have some food brought in. Whatever they want. Pizza? Mac and cheese?" The offer, laced with the casual ease of a man for whom anything is a phone call away, immediately put Imani on the defensive. It was a reminder of the chasm between their worlds. She fed her children with careful budgeting and late-night work. He could conjure a feast with a flick of his wrist. "We're fine," she said coolly, pulling a Ziploc bag from her backpack. It contained apple slices and a slightly squashed peanut butter sandwich. I came prepared. It was a small thing, a sandwich against the world, but it was a declaration of her competence, her self-sufficiency. "I don't need you. I never needed you." Julian watched her expertly divide the sandwich, handing a piece to each child, and the sight of that simple, loving act was more devastating than any angry words she could have hurled at him. He had missed all of this. 10 years of this. 10 years of apple slices and squashed sandwiches and 1,000 other tiny moments that constituted a life. He sank into an armchair in the corner, a king exiled to the furthest edge of his own temporary kingdom. He watched them, a spectator to the family that should have been his. As the kids ate, a fragile, unspoken truce settled over the room. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a heavy, awkward reality. They were here, together, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. After they finished eating, the exhaustion of the day finally began to catch up with the twins. Luna's somersaults became slower, and Leo's fascination with the giant TV waned. He climbed onto the sofa, laid his head on Imani's lap, and was asleep in minutes. Luna curled up at her mother's other side, her small hand clutching a fold of Imani's coat. With her children asleep, cradled against her, Imani's armor seemed to soften. The fierce protector could rest for a moment. And in that quiet, with only the sound of the howling wind outside, the past came for them. "Why?" Julian's voice was barely a whisper, but in the silent room, it was a thunderclap. "Why didn't you tell me, Imani?" Imani didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, her hand stroking Leo's soft curls. "Tell you?" she repeated, her voice dangerously devoid of emotion. "Tell the man who left me a check and a Dear Jane letter on a hotel notepad? Tell the man who changed his number and disappeared from the face of the earth? How, Julian? Should I have sent a carrier pigeon to your ivory tower?" The raw, unvarnished truth of it silenced him. He had made himself unreachable. That had been the whole point. He wanted a clean break, a surgical amputation of his past, so he could stride unencumbered into the future his father had designed for him. "My father," he began, the words tasting like poison. "Ah, yes, your father," Imani said, a bitter smile touching her lips. "The great Augustus Hayes. I remember him. The way he looked at me at that university fundraiser. Like I was something he'd scraped off the bottom of his shoe. You think I didn't know? You think I didn't feel the pressure you were under?" She finally turned to look at him, and her eyes were filled with a profound, ancient sadness. "I loved you, Julian. I loved the boy who quoted poetry in the rain and dreamed of building things that mattered, not just things that made money. I thought that boy was strong enough." A flashback, hot and sharp, seared Julian's mind. A college dorm room, late at night, rain lashing against the window. Imani, her head on his chest, tracing patterns on his shirt. They were talking about the future. His father wanted him to go into finance, to take over the family empire. Julian had confessed his secret dream to design affordable, sustainable housing, to build communities. Imani had looked at him with such belief, such shining adoration. "You can do it," she'd whispered. "You can change the world." He had believed her. For a while. "He said he would disown me," Julian said, the confession feeling pathetic and hollow even to his own ears. "He said I was throwing my life away on a fantasy. He said my choice of partner proved I didn't have the killer instinct to run the company. Your choice of partner, Imani repeated softly. The phrase hung in the air, clinical and cruel. She knew what it meant. His black girlfriend, the scholarship girl from the wrong side of the tracks. The one who didn't fit into the Hayes family portrait. I was a coward, Julian said, the admission costing him everything. I was a coward. I chose the money. I chose the path of least resistance. I told myself it was the smart thing to do. The only thing to do. I told myself you'd be better off without that kind of battle in your life. You didn't tell yourself that, Julian, Imani corrected him, her voice quiet but unyielding. You let your father tell you that, and you chose to believe him. But you didn't just choose money over me. You chose it over yourself, over the man you wanted to be. She was right. The man who dreamed of building communities was a ghost, buried even deeper than his memory of her. I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you left, she continued, her gaze distant now, lost in the memory. I was alone. I was terrified. And for a fleeting moment, I thought about finding you. I thought about fighting. But then I remembered the look on your father's face. And I realized I would not bring my children into a world where they would have to fight for their own father's love. I would not raise them to feel like they were a secret, or a problem to be managed. She looked down at her sleeping children, her expression softening into one of fierce, boundless love. So I took that check you left me, the one that was supposed to be my severance package from your life, and I tore it into 1,000 pieces. And I built my own world. A world for them. A world where they are everything. The story, told in that quiet, steady voice, was a devastating indictment. It wasn't a tale of a woman scorned. It was a tale of a woman who had refused to be a victim. A woman who had chosen dignity and love over a fight she knew she couldn't win. Julian felt something inside him break. Not just guilt, but a profound, soul-crushing sense of loss. He hadn't just lost a girlfriend. He had lost a universe. He had missed everything. Imani, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. I am so sorry. The words, as immense as they were, felt small and inadequate in the vast space of their shared history. Imani just nodded, accepting them not as a solution, but as a long overdue acknowledgement of a wound. For the first time, the wall of ice between them began to thaw. The anger was still there, but beneath it, a current of shared memory, of shared humanity, began to flow. She finally took off her coat. They sat in silence for a long time. The only sound, the soft breathing of the children and the rage of the storm outside. The quiet was different now. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of the past, the pain, and the first tentative flicker of something else. Understanding. He has your frown, Imani said softly, a small smile playing on her lips as she looked at Leo. He does it when he's trying to figure something out. A puzzle, or why the sky is blue. Julian felt a lump form in his throat. And she has my mother's eyes, he said, his gaze on Luna. My mother always said they were the best part of the family. In that moment, they weren't ex-lovers or a millionaire and the woman he'd left behind. They were just two parents looking at their children. A fragile, temporary bridge was being built between them in the quiet, storm-locked room. They talked more. About the children. Leo was a whirlwind of energy and questions. Luna was a quiet observer, an artist who could get lost in a drawing for hours. He learned that Imani had built a successful freelance career, that she was proud of the life she had made. She learned that his life, for all its material success, was sterile and lonely. There was a moment, as the night deepened, when Julian got up and gently draped his own expensive cashmere coat over the sleeping forms of his children. Imani watched him, and her expression was unreadable. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something. A crack in the wall. He sat down again, this time a little closer. The room was warm. The children were safe. For the first time in a decade, Julian felt a flicker of something that resembled peace. It was fragile. It was unearned. But it was there. It felt like, just maybe, healing was possible. And that's when the knock came at the door. It was a sharp, authoritative rap that shattered the quiet intimacy of the room. Julian and Imani both started, looking at the door as if it were a grenade. "Who is that?" Imani whispered, her body instantly tensing, her hand going to her children. Julian had no idea. He hadn't called anyone else. He stood up and went to the door, a sense of deep foreboding washing over him. He opened it a crack. Standing in the hallway was a man in a severe, dark suit. Arthur Vance, his father's fixer. A man with cold eyes and a reptilian smile, whose job it was to solve problems before they became embarrassments. "Julian," Vance said, his voice a low, confidential purr. "Your father was concerned when he couldn't reach you. He asked me to come and make sure everything was under control." Vance's eyes flickered past Julian, into the room, taking in the scene, the woman on the couch, the sleeping children, the domesticity of it all. His smile tightened. "What are you doing here, Arthur?" Julian demanded, trying to block the doorway with his body. "I'm here to extract you," Vance said simply. "We have a helicopter on standby at a private airfield nearby. The storm is letting up just enough for a window. You can still make your meeting in Tokyo." He was speaking as if Imani wasn't even there. And then he looked directly at Imani, his gaze dismissive, appraising. He took a step into the room. "And for you, miss?" He let the question hang, as if her name was irrelevant. "Mr. Hayes, Sr., is a very generous man. He understands that situations like this can be complicated. He has authorized me to make you a very generous offer to ensure your discretion and to provide for any future considerations. We can have a contract drawn up immediately." The words hit the air and detonated. A generous offer. Discretion. Contract. It was history repeating itself, but this time it wasn't a cowardly letter from a scared boy. It was a cold, corporate transaction from a ruthless empire. They weren't trying to apologize. They were trying to buy her silence, to reduce her and her children to a line item in the Hayes family budget. A problem to be managed. Imani had been sitting frozen, but at those words, she came to life. It was not a fiery explosion, but a cold, terrifying implosion. All the fragile warmth that had built up in the room, all the tentative understanding, all the shared moments over their sleeping children, it all vanished, vaporized by the cold poison of Vance's words. She looked at Julian, and the look in her eyes was one of absolute, soul-shattering betrayal. The brief flicker of the boy she had loved was gone, replaced once again by the man who had let her go, the man who was a part of this cold, cruel world that sought to erase her. "Get him out," she said, her voice a dead whisper. Vance smirked. "I think you misunderstand the situation." "No," Imani said, standing up, her movements full of a chilling, regal fury. "I understand perfectly. I've understood for 10 years. She looked directly at Julian, her gaze pinning him to the spot. The hurt in her eyes was so profound it was almost physical. "You haven't changed at all," she said, her voice breaking with the weight of her shattered hope. "You're still just a boy hiding behind his father's money. I actually, for a minute in here, I actually thought." She shook her head, a bitter, self-mocking laugh escaping her lips. "How stupid of me." She gently woke her children. "Come on, babies. We're leaving." "But, Mama, it's sleepy time," Luna murmured, rubbing her eyes. "I know, my love. We'll find another place to sleep." Julian was frozen, watching the scene unfold like a slow-motion car crash. "Imani, no. Wait. This isn't... I didn't call him." "It doesn't matter if you called him, Julian." She finally screamed, all the pain and rage of the last decade erupting to the surface. "He is here. This is your world. This is what your world does. It doesn't fix things, it buys them. It doesn't heal, it silences." She grabbed their bags, her hands trembling. She pulled her children toward the door, past the smirking fixer, past the frozen, horrified man who was their father. "Imani, please," Julian begged, reaching for her arm. She flinched away from his touch, as if it were fire. "Don't you touch me," she spat, her voice laced with venom. "Don't you ever touch me or my children again." And with that, she was gone, pulling her children out into the hallway, leaving Julian standing in the middle of the silent, luxurious suite that had for a few brief, beautiful hours felt like a home. The door clicked shut behind her, a sound as final and as deafening as a gunshot. He was alone. Alone with his father's man. Alone with the wreckage of the one good thing he had almost, for a second, managed to get back. The shatter point had come, and it had broken everything. Have you ever had a moment of absolute clarity? A moment where the fog lifts, and you see everything, your life, your choices, the person you've become, with a terrible, brutal precision. That's where Julian was now. The door had closed, and in the silence, he was left with two paths. One led back to the sky, to the private jets, to the cold, lonely empire his father had built for him. The other led out into the chaos of the terminal, toward a woman who hated him and two children who didn't know him. It was the choice he failed to make 10 years ago. But this is the thing about second chances. They are rarely gentle. They are almost always a fire. And you have to decide if you're willing to walk through it. The silence in the suite was a crushing weight. The warm, lived-in feeling from moments before was gone, replaced by the cold, sterile luxury he was so accustomed to. It felt like a tomb. Arthur Vance broke the silence, his voice smooth and reptilian. "Well, that was dramatic. But ultimately, for the best. Messy situations like this are best cauterized quickly. Your father will be pleased. The helicopter is waiting, Julian." Julian didn't turn. He kept staring at the door Imani had walked through. He saw her face again in his mind, the flicker of hope he'd seen in her eyes, so fragile and tentative, and then the utter devastation as it was extinguished. "You haven't changed at all." Her words echoed in the hollow space where his heart should be. And in that echo, he finally understood. She wasn't just angry about the money or the fixer. She was mourning the man she thought she'd seen for a few hours. The man he was supposed to be. The man he had murdered a decade ago at the altar of his own ambition. "She was right," Julian said, his voice quiet, almost to himself. Vance chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "They always think they're right. Don't worry. The check I'll have delivered to her tomorrow will be substantial. She'll come around. They always do. And that was it. That was the spark that ignited the bonfire. Julian turned around slowly, and the look on his face was one Arthur Vance had never seen before. It wasn't the face of the pliable heir or the ruthless CEO. It was the face of a man who had just been pushed past his breaking point. The emptiness in his eyes had been replaced by a terrifying, focused rage. "Get out," Julian said, his voice dangerously calm. Vance's smirk faltered. "Julian, let's not be hasty." "I said," Julian repeated, taking a step forward, his entire body radiating a menace that was primal and deeply personal. "You're making a mistake," Vance warned, taking an involuntary step back. "The mistake was my entire life up until 5 minutes ago," Julian snarled. "The mistake was ever listening to you or to him." He pulled out his phone, his movements sharp and precise. He didn't hesitate. He found his father's number and hit dial. Vance watched, his eyes wide with disbelief, as Julian put the phone to his ear. "Father," Julian said, his voice like iron. There was a pause. "No, I'm not on the helicopter. And I won't be. The deal in Tokyo? You can handle it yourself." Another pause. Julian's jaw tightened. "No, you don't understand. I'm not talking about the deal. I'm talking about everything. The company, the name, the money. It's yours. It was always yours. I'm done." He could hear his father's apoplectic shouting through the phone. He held it away from his ear, his eyes locked on Vance. "And Arthur," Julian said, his voice dropping even lower. "You're fired. If you ever come near me or my family again, I will dismantle you, not with money, with my own 2 hands." He didn't wait for a reply. He ended the call, plunging the suite into a stunned silence. He had just detonated his own life. He had just set fire to the golden cage he had lived in for a decade. And he had never felt so free. He turned his blazing eyes to Vance. "I believe I told you to get out." Vance, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely afraid. He scrambled for the door and disappeared without another word. Now, Julian was truly alone. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he couldn't stay in this room. He had to find her. He had to find them. This wasn't about winning her back. It was about proving her wrong. It was about showing her, and himself, that the man she saw for that brief time in this room was not an illusion. He was real, and he was finally ready to fight for him. He burst out of the suite and started to run. He ran through the quiet, carpeted hallways of the first-class terminal, his polished shoes slipping on the floor. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to find her before she disappeared, before she found a way out of this airport and out of his life for good. He emerged back into the chaos of the main terminal. It was a sea of people, of luggage, of despair. Finding her would be impossible, a needle in a haystack of humanity. But he had to try. He scanned the crowds, his heart hammering against his ribs. He pushed through people, his frantic "excuse me," sorry a desperate mantra. He checked the ticketing counters, the gates, the makeshift sleeping areas. Nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. What if she was already gone? What if he'd found them only to lose them all over again, this time for good? And then he saw them. They were at the far end of the terminal, at a quiet gate that was dark and deserted. Imani was on the phone, her back to him, her posture radiating a tense frustration. Leo and Luna were huddled on a bench beside her, their faces weary, their adventurous spirit finally extinguished. Luna was crying softly into the sleeve of her coat. The sight of his daughter crying, of her small, sad shoulders shaking, broke something in him that could never be repaired. He had caused this. His world, his poison had done this to her. He slowed his pace, walking toward them, his heart in his throat. He had no script, no strategy. He had only the raw, terrifying, beautiful truth. Imani ended her call with a frustrated sigh and turned. She saw him approaching, and her whole body went rigid. She immediately stood in front of the children, a human shield. "I told you to stay away from us, Julian," she said, her voice exhausted but firm. "I know," he said, stopping a respectful 10 feet away. He held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I know you did. I'm not here to ask for anything." He looked past her, his eyes finding his children. His gaze was soft, full of a pain and a love so profound it was heartbreaking. "Leo, Luna," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The children looked up at him, their expressions wary. "I saw you were sad, and I wanted to say, I'm sorry." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, then knelt down so he was on their level. It was an act of submission, of humility. He was no longer the tall, imposing millionaire. He was just a man, on his knees, on the dirty floor of an airport terminal. The man who came to the room, he was not a good person, Julian said, speaking directly to the children, his voice gentle and clear. "He works for my father. And my father, he and I, we don't agree on things, on what's important. They believe that money can fix everything, and they are wrong." Imani watched, her arms crossed, her expression a mask of stone. But she didn't stop him. "I made a very big mistake a long time ago," Julian continued, his eyes now finding Imani's over the heads of the children. "I was scared, and I chose the easy path instead of the right one. And because of that, I missed everything. I missed meeting you the day you were born. I missed your first steps, your first words. I missed all of your smiles." Tears were openly streaming down his face now. He didn't bother to wipe them away. This was the truth in all its ugly, heartbreaking glory. "I can never get that time back," he said, his voice breaking. "I know that. But I am not that man anymore. That man, he ceased to exist about 20 minutes ago. I don't know who I am yet, but I know who I want to be. I want to be a man who is brave enough to deserve to know you." He looked back at Imani, his heart in his eyes. He wasn't offering her a future. He wasn't asking for a second chance. He was simply stating a fact. "The fixer is gone, Imani. I fired him. I told my father I'm done. The money, the company, it's all gone. I have nothing left to offer you. No private suites, no contracts, no easy solutions. All I have is this. Me. A man who wants to start earning the right to be your father." He said the last words to the children, but his eyes were locked on hers. The silence that followed was the most profound of all. It was just the four of them at the end of the world, the quiet hum of the deserted terminal, their only soundtrack. Imani stared at him, at this broken, weeping man on his knees. This was not the boy she had loved, or the monster she had hated. This was someone new, someone raw and real, and utterly stripped of all pretense. He had burned his own world to the ground, right in front of her. She saw Luna take a hesitant step toward him, her curiosity overriding her fear. She reached out a small hand and touched one of his tears. "Are you sad because you missed our smiles?" she asked, her voice a tiny, innocent whisper. Julian let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry. He nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," he finally choked out. "Very sad." And that was it. That was the moment the dam inside Imani finally broke. The anger, the pride, the decade of hurt it all washed away, leaving behind the one thing that had been buried underneath it all. A stubborn, resilient, and seemingly unkillable love. She walked forward and knelt down in front of her children. "His name is Julian," she said softly to them. "And a very, very long time ago, he was my best friend." She looked at Julian, and for the first time in 10 years, she truly saw him. And he saw her. The storm outside was still raging, but in the quiet of gate C-27, the storm inside had finally passed. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if they could ever rebuild what was broken. But she knew she couldn't walk away. Not from this man. Not from this moment. She reached out and put her hand on his. Her touch was hesitant, but it was there. "Okay, Julian," she whispered, the words a promise and a beginning. "Okay?" He looked up, his face a mess of tears and hope, and squeezed her hand. The four of them stayed there for a long moment, a broken and beautiful little constellation in the vast, empty terminal. They were not a family yet. They were just a possibility. But after a decade of winter, it felt like the first day of spring. What a journey. They're a long way from a perfect ending, but they found a beginning. It makes you think about what forgiveness and redemption really mean. It's not about forgetting the past, but about being brave enough to build a new future. What do you think is the first thing Julian will do as a father? Let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you so much for being here and sharing this story with me. We'll see you in the next one. To enjoy the next one, please subscribe.